Seguint amb les dinàmiques que fan referència i que tenen relació amb l'estudi de les identitats, de les ascripcions nacionals, del nacionalisme, aquesta tarda ens han demanat de fer una taula rodona, amb aquests dos ponents que tenim, una a la meva dreta i l'altra a la meva esquerra, sobre mecanismes subjectius d'identificació en el nacionalisme i en la construcció d'una identitat europea. Sabut és que en el cas, per exemple, del nacionalisme català, però no en d'altres casos, la vessant cívica, l'arrel cosmopolita, antirracial, antirracista, doncs ha estat molt prevalent, al igual que també ho ha estat una visió reformadora, en un primer moment de l'estat espanyol, no ens van fer massa cas o no ens han fet massa cas, i també una visió plenament europeista. Bé, aquella frase que diuen que deia l'Ortega d'Europa la solució, des de Catalunya jo penso que feia forces dècades, per no dir inclús segles, doncs que ja es havia, no sé si dir inventat, però que sí que es publicitava. Per tant, el nacionalisme català en aquest sentit, diguem que ha begut de les fonts, diríem, més equànims i segurament més encertades del que ha pogut ser l'ascripció o la ideologia, si és que és una ideologia, del nacionalisme, a diferència de formes nacionalistes que han estat molt més abrandades, molt més basades en la idea del ius sanguinis, amb la idea de l'ètnia, d'una ètnia prevalent sobre una altra, i idees, en definitiva, que són allunyades del que ja entenem que és la modernitat i, evidentment, el liberalisme. Bé, avui tenim a dos ponents que podríem dir també d'excepció, vinguts del nord, com diu la cançó, en el cas del ponent de la dreta, que és el que ve d'Alemanya, i de l'esquerra, els que ve d'Hongria, que ens parlaran de les seves experiències en relació a aquesta qüestió, i també ens posaran una mica al cap del carrer de quines són les tendències que s'estan vivint en una Europa, i en aquest cas també en una Alemanya i una Hongria, que estan en moviment. D'Hongria abans parlàvem amb el senyor Petöcz, que és un país molt curiós, i és un país molt curiós perquè a la Primera Guerra Mundial Hongria va perdre 2/3 parts del seu territori. I què vol dir això? Vol dir que hi ha comunitats nacionals hongareses escampades, repartides en tots aquells països que engloben, que envolten l'estat nació que és Hongria avui en dia. Per exemple, a Romania hi ha vora 2 milions d'hongaresos, a Eslovàquia un 15% de la població d'origen eslovac és hongaresa. Sense anar més lluny, els que us agrada el futbol, com el senyor Del Pozo, en Ladislau Kubala, que evidentment era català, nascut a Eslovàquia, era un hongarès d'Eslovàquia. Això simplement per ressaltar i per explicitar la pluralitat que parlava Steiner del nostre continent. Bé, em sembla que ja he esbandit una mica masses bugades en poc temps, per tant potser és el moment ara de donar el pas i de flor, com diuen en anglès, als nostres amics ponents, que us els presentaré seguidament. A la meva esquerra, que serà el primer que intervindrà, tenim el senyor György Petöcz, o en hongarès diríem Petöcz György. Petöcz György, els hongaresos primer posen el cognom i després el nom, que és periodista, editor i publicista a Brussel, or something like this, una revista política online. Participa el senyor Petöcz en diversos mitjans. El seu camp d'interès principal és la política hongaresa i, de fet, ens vindrà a parlar de les dinàmiques que succeeixen en aquest país. I des del 2005 fins al 2010 va ser el director de l'Institut Cultural Hongarès a Brussel·les, que un servidor, per cert, el coneix i hi ha estat. Abans de ser el director d'aquest institut, havia estat director del Centre d'Estudis de Mitjans a la Universitat Centreeuropea a Budapest. Prèviament havia dirigit Elet és Irodalom,
East European University.
Elet és Irodalom, que és un seminari político-cultural. Durant els 90 va treballar de corresponsal a Itàlia pel diari hongarès Hírlap i és autor de diversos estudis. I a la meva dreta tenim el senyor Timo Lochocki, que és alemany, com el seu nom no indica, i graduat en Psicologia Social per la Universitat de Washington. Aquest senyor és bavarès, del nord de Baviera, d'una població propera on va néixer, parlant de futbol, en Schuster. I màster en Ciència Política per la Universitat Humboldt de Berlín. De fet, ara aquest senyor bavarès viu a Berlín. És doctor per la mateixa Universitat Humboldt de Berlín amb una tesi que en anglès diríem Hard Times in the Land of Plenty. How right-wing populist anti-multiculturalism parties can seize their electoral niche in the immigration societies of the Netherlands, Sweden and West Germany. Déu-n'hi-do. El títol ja és una mica una tesi doctoral, almenys és la introducció. I bé, podríem dir que també ha publicat treballs, estudis sobre integració europea, polítiques d'immigració i política comparada sobre sistemes de partits polítics. És, a més, consultor de l'Institut d'Europeus Demòcrates. Bé, fetes les presentacions, l'amic hongarès ens farà la primera intervenció. Endavant, gràcies.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you for the invitation. So I thought to talk about the Hungarian experience of these years, which I think have some relevance for the development, very recent developments in Europe, especially this right-wing turn throughout Europe. I think that Hungary went a bit too far in that direction, but I will talk about this. But I will develop my what I say in 4 points. The first point is a bit personal, with some non-personal but the politological consequences. The personal part is that 89 was a real turning point in our personal lives. And not only in our personal lives, but also the world view, how we saw the things, and how we lived through the things before. I remember the 80s, and especially before that, history was not non-existent. It was very constant, the life. So when by chance you got a scholarship, you went away for I don't know, perhaps even 3 years or something like that, or you returned back to the private life because of some reasons for a long time, and you came back to the public sphere, if there was a public sphere, you found the same situation, what was before, the same people and the same concepts and so on. And in 89, everything changed. Somehow we had this feeling of getting into history, and it was very, very difficult to, not very, very interesting, of course, but very complicated to live through and understand what is happening. And what was really happening is that we understood that history, so what happens in a country, in politics, it is very, very personal. Before 89, we were taught educated in Marxist history, Marxist concept of history, historical materialism. And so we were taught of the iron laws of history. So that is what happens. It has to happen like that because the forces, the impersonal forces of history make it like that. And what was really fantastic, perhaps there are iron laws or impersonal laws in history. Probably there are. But our experience was that the chance, the haphazard events, the feelings, emotions, the very personal details are at least that important as these big impersonal laws, especially for myself, also, but for my friends, for my generation who were active, young and active in 89. We learned that because the guys who were beside us at the university, from one moment to the other, became members of the parliament, became our friends, became ministers, and so on and so forth. And we saw that one word among two people could change the way of thought of the other one. One misunderstanding or one good cooperation could change a lot and could change at the end of the chain, could change the whole politics of the country. And it is really an important and a very shocking, it was a very shocking experience, and it has three consequences, major consequences. One is the responsibility of the politicians and the intellectual class, because words can't. How you formulate, how you think, how you formulate the situations, how you formulate about the future, about present politics, how do you listen to the other one or don't listen, shut the doors. The professor, I remember this big lecture here in the morning, he was talking about this, whether we can listen to the other one. And this is a personal capacity and the responsibility of the intellectuals and the politicians. There's a second consequence is that activity like this, for example, but not only among friends, but otherwise, so activity of the liberals, if we are talking about liberals, to formulate their thoughts and expand, let it know, is very, very important on the micro level and then on the bigger levels, so because it counts really. And the third consequence is that if history is at least partly led by micro-histories of people, of individuals, then, of course, explanation is very difficult. It is getting more interesting, of course, but very, very difficult. And so this was my first point, I have four. The second point is that probably the case of, so if we talk about identity, national identity or communal identity, community identity and the European Union, the case of Catalonia and Hungary is the opposite. Because for Catalonia the question is, if they arrive there, the question is how the European construction, the European institutions can accommodate the choice of a people. And as it can be the question in the case of Scotland, it can be in the future, it can be a question in many countries, with many countries. In Hungary, vice versa. The question today is whether we, they, the Hungarians, want or not accept not being members, because no one questions being members or not, but want to accept the consequences of membership, the responsibilities and duties out of membership or not, or want to contribute to the European construction or not. The situation was evolving, and it's very important to know that I don't want to bring too many exotic details to you, just really in very good...
democràtica. Dit això, és veritat també que a nivell de resultats electorals el partit polític o les formacions que estan duent a terme algunes d'aquestes iniciatives que explicava l'amic hongarès, doncs estan veient que aquestes polítiques no tenen cap cost electoral, més aviat tot el contrari. Després de la intervenció d'en Timo Lochocki, potser podrà fer, si s'escau, algun comentari, diríem, final abans de donar pas al to de pregs i preguntes. Bé, doncs seguirem amb el ponent que ens arriba d'Alemanya, Timo Lochocki, que, com ell ens ha explicat, ens parlarà d'un cas diferent a l'hongarès, que és el cas alemany. El que demanaríem és assistència tècnica, perquè sembla ser que el tema informàtic hi ha alguna petita... Això?
Bravo!
Endavant.
Various
Thank you. Various topics which I think are intermingling in these days in Europe. And I tried to do this in a very concise presentation, which is rather considered as food for thought and less as a lecture. So in case you have questions on me elaborating on something, please don't hesitate to let me know. At first, I want to show you one slide, which is lacking very pivotal information. I'll come back to that very slide in 5 minutes in my presentation. This very slide, though, is key in order to understand the public conception of Europe within Germany, respectively how Germans and also how Northern Europeans, on a more broader scale, at least to my reading, perceive of the ongoing European debates. This very slide here measures a survey question which has been asked in all these 3 countries, Germany, Sweden, Netherlands, every year since the last 23 years. And the respondents had to answer whether they agree with the statement yes or no. And I know men can hardly multitask, so while I'm talking you guys probably have to skip the slide, but the women can still try to figure out what the slide might be hinting on while I'm talking. But I'll come back to this in 5 minutes. I devoted 3 or 4 years of my precious life to writing a PhD about right populist parties in Europe and the reasons why these parties come up. And aside from various very interesting topics I encountered with these last 3 or 4 years, is one that right populist parties should be, at least to my reading, be conceived as the emotional thermostat of a nation. This for which these parties, respectively the rhetoric they use, are successful if they grasp emotions, discourses within the national realm, which thrive extremely well with the public. Therefore, these parties and their program, so to speak, is the very best indication or inclination, one might say, in order to figure out what a nation is currently thinking, what a nation is currently concerned about. These parties thrive for 2 reasons. The first reason is that they offer a broad anti-establishment agenda. You come and usually you know about this. They basically say these guys in Madrid, in Paris, in Brussels, and Berlin, they all suck. They have no idea what we're really concerned about. They have no clue. They just work the money in their own pockets. They don't give a shit what we, the common man on the street, are really, the common women, the common lady on the street is really concerned about. Exactly. The second part of the rhetoric, though, is far more important in order to understand these parties, which is they offer a very, very plain and simple solution to all complicated political questions, which is the return to the nation-state. However they frame it, be it in France, in Hungary, in Germany, Netherlands, the rhetoric of these parties differs, of course, remarkably. But the final determinant of their rhetoric, of their programmatic solution to whatever it may be, immigration, globalization, gay rights, whatever, European Union affairs, is let's just turn back time to how it used to be 20, 30, 40 years ago. And of course, the framing feature of however it was 20, 30, 40 years ago has been that the state, the nation state, was the key organizational principle. These are the 2 things I want you to bear in mind. Right populist parties basically thrive if they can explain a political problem very simply and point to we, the nation, Netherlands, Germany, England, can solve this far better alone. And secondly, these parties can do so if they can convey to the voter, well, you know, this very problem here can rather be solved best with our own national virtues, with our own natural values. Whatever these guys do, the migrants, the EU, globalization, is a threat for our national community, for our national virtues. Therefore, these parties do their very best they can to link the European Union or migration together as a threat to what this nation allegedly stands for. To give an example, in the Netherlands, Geert Wilders and Pim Fortuyn has been extremely successful in portraying the migrant as being the prime threat to the Dutch tolerance. So he basically said migrants are a threat to Dutch tolerance because they want to implement Sharia in the Netherlands. In Scandinavia, nobody talks about tolerance. People talk about that migrants are a threat to the welfare state. In England, Nigel Farage doesn't talk about neither. He talks about that these migrants are in charge of that Britain lost its empire. And this basically is very similar to what Marine Le Pen says. And now, with these two ideas in mind, I want you to turn to this slide I put on the wall, which should help us to illustrate what the right populists in Germany talk about and how they, so to speak, how they frame European Union affairs. Again, the red line shows the number of respondents with a German passport which said yes to one question. And these things were measured since 1990. And since I thought about this, giving this presentation in Spain, it might be of interest to see what other allegedly Northern European countries, which at least to my reading of Southern European newspapers, tend to be lumped together as the North in European affairs. I used these two other countries totally randomly. I could have put in Denmark, Norway, or Belgium if you wish, but I choose these two countries just for the mere fact that data was at hand easily. But I assure you the data lines will look very similar. So I choose these three lines as point of contrast. And now, before I continue talking, I wonder, do you have any idea what the red line could indicate? What have 80% of Germans said yes to since 1994 till 2008? To which survey question? So what the question was, do you like the euro? Yes, no. Other guesses? So sorry, sir. So you say that in the Netherlands only 20% supported the euro.
Feeling to be European.
Feeling to be European. Then again, you assume that only every fifth Dutch person feels European.
So this comes to European politics.
Sorry, what?
Satisfied with European politics.
Satisfaction about European politics.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Immigration.
I mean,
Immigration.
Immigration, Europe, okay. Okay, now I help you 10 a bit. None of this has anything to do with Europe or with immigration. No, nothing at all. This question has nothing to do with Europe. The question was, are you afraid of losing your job in the next 12 months? And in order to understand the contemporary German debate on the European Union, one needs to bear in mind these figures. For 20 years' time, 80% of Germans were highly afraid of losing their job. For 20 years' time, 4 out of 5 Germans were living in a society in which they conceived of the economy lays in ruins.
That's why they never lost their jobs.
That's why they never lost their jobs. So this is just the starting point of course, you already get my point. What might the German right populists talk about in these days?
Because here people were not worried about that, and they lost their jobs ultimately.
This might be the case, yes.
That's a good strategy.
So this, the next one I show you is, here they measured only, when for a far briefer amount of time, what were the pressing problems for Germany. The data is also a tiny bit different. The first one is OECD, and this one is only a German survey. Therefore, the results vary a tiny bit. But I want to point out here that the red line, again, is unemployment. And the unemployment concerns in Germany, the unemployment concerns were paramount since 1990, since 2009. And only 4 or 5 years ago, the unemployment concerns went down and they kind of got replaced as number one problem by the euro crisis. So, and important to mention, there is no immigration indication at all, meaning that it's less than 5% of German citizens which are concerned about immigration, which is interesting since Germany has a net influx of 800,000 migrants every year. But since economic problems have been so paramount, Nobody even dared to talk about migration, because this doesn't indicate that people were not worried about immigration, but they said, given how everything else is not working, I don't care about asylum seekers right now, I need a job. And the last slide, then I'm done with the slides. This one is supposed to offer some actual facts to the perceptions I just spoke about. The first two slides measure perceptions. What do voters, the Germans, think? And this measures the unemployment rate as it was really measured. The three columns to the right are other countries. I put these in for comparison's sake. But I want to show here that, as you see, that only from 2009 on, from 2008 on, the German unemployment rate dropped underneath 9%. So again, as indicated with the other slides, only the last 3-4 years, the German economy recovered from a valley which lasted nearly 20 years and brought upon the country huge economic problems, huge increasing public debt, and a tremendous amount of people looking for jobs. The other line I put in the GDP growth line, and I added the 2% line since the German economy was very stale and economic growth only led to further employment if the economy grew more than 2%. So you see here only in 2000 and from 2006 to 2007 the German economy grew so it could generate jobs. So this is the background information I'd like to offer in order to talk about what the German right populist parties talk about now. The German right populist party, the Alternative für Deutschland, the Alternative for Germany, fits exactly in the categories I just outlined. They say the German political elites, they do not really do what we, the people, want. And secondly, they say what these guys do, Merkel, and who you name it, they work against the very core values this country, Germany, is built on. And the prime narrative the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, rallies on now is German politicians wire money to Southern Europe, even though these countries are in charge of their mess totally alone. They did not reform their economies. And, very important, we, the Germans, suffered under economic circumstances that were super dire for 20 years. And nobody helped us. And now these guys over there have problems since 3-4 years, which they are in charge of themselves. Why the hell are we helping them? I just want to give this as an idea that the right populists in Germany, they don't win elections or votes because they point out, well, you know, the European project sucks, or Spaniards smell, or the Greek, I don't know what. It's not about clear-cut racism or that the EU is a problem. The prime idea is this: the European project, our political elite, is in charge of actions that threaten the very core of our nation, which is working hard, enduring, being honest, accepting hardships for generations, for decades. Very important to bear in mind, this is not about what really happens in Germany or what really is the case with the German economy at all. It is the story the Germans made up about themselves. And of course, surprise, surprise, the Germans look very good in this story. They are the die-hard, industrious German worker who went through all this for 20 years, and now they finally reap the harvest of the time they went through, the time they suffered. And the very last remark before I'm done with the presentation is, if you read German newspapers, especially conservative German newspapers, how they link the win of the World Cup of the German team to what it might mean for the German nation, the idea is, look at our boys. They work hard. They fought against all odds. And finally, they basically got what they emphasize deserved. They worked hard for this, and they lost for 10 years in a row, exactly like us. We worked so hard, it never paid off, and now it finally worked. So tell your kids, work hard, be enduring, be honest, be a good leader, and then you will succeed eventually. And this is something I want you to take away from this presentation to my reading. Right populist parties, they do not thrive because they make a solid point, or because they can really point to the democratic deficit of the European Union or something of that sort. No, they thrive if they can portray the EU or any other external influence, be it migration, the English, the Russians, whomever, as a threat to the very core, to the very values that keep this nation together. And these values are, of course, a story. They're just a story, as you outlined. They're just a bunch of very, very compelling lies. But it's lies that thrive in the population. That's it.
Molt interessant la intervenció de l'amic i company alemany, una mica una actualització del que ens deia Max Weber amb la famosa ètica protestant i esperit del que va guanyar el darrer mundial l'any 2006. El PIB italià l'any següent va créixer 2 punts més del que s'esperava. I avui en dia en el món econòmic cada cop s'està estudiant més l'economia de les emocions i de les sensacions, en el sentit que més enllà de determinades dades macroeconòmiques o de determinades càlculs macroeconòmics hi ha un esperit humà que pot nivellar o desnivellar la balança en un favor o en un altre, i sens dubte doncs, el cas d'Alemanya és un cas jo diria que paradigmàtic per tot el que ha representat a Europa de canvis de tot tipus, socials, econòmics, industrials, culturals, religiosos, que han tingut sens dubte una incidència en l'economia i ulteriorment una incidència definitiva també amb comportaments polítics. Ens ha parlat també de partits populistes arreu d'Europa, o en aquest cas de l'Europa del Nord. Jo sempre dic una cosa, els partits populistes són un autèntic calaix de sastre, perquè posar populismes d'ultradreta com pot ser la senyora Marine Le Pen o més encara el seu pare del Front Nacional en un país com França, que té una història molt particular i molt esbiaixada en referència doncs, a l'extrema dreta, no? Doncs, o la política viscuda amb un cert extremisme, no? Com que ens parlava Hobsbawm, és una cosa. Posar al mateix nivell un populisme com el del UKIP o de certs sectors del Partit Conservador britànic al mateix nivell, bé, en definitiva, aquests senyors són els que fa 60 anys, 70 anys es van oposar doncs, al feixisme i al nazisme, no? Per tant, el que passa és que és cert que hi ha, o el cas holandès que molt bé ens explicava l'amic alemany, que justifiquen determinades percepcions o determinades visions polítiques perquè suposadament aquests immigrants són els que fan perillar no només l'estat del benestar, sinó tot un cabal de valors que té aquella mateixa societat. Realment el fenomen de l'extrema dreta, de la dreta populista, del populisme, perquè jo soc dels que pensa que també n'hi ha d'esquerres, doncs és un element doncs, realment molt difícil de calibrar i de valorar. En qualsevol cas, molt agraïts per la teva intervenció, perquè ha estat certament molt interessant. Jo potser, abans de donar el pas al torn de pregs i preguntes, com es deia abans, demanaria als dos ponents si volen fer algun afegitó a allò que han dit. Would you like to add something else to...
I enjoyed very much the presentation. No, I don't have. For the moment, I don't have.
Would you like to... Doncs, sense més espera, passem a donar-vos la paraula. Qui vulgui fer algun comentari, consideració, crítica, valoració personal, demanda, suggeriment, suggerència. You want to add something?
There's one tiny thing I want to add is what I'm working for is the German Marshall Fund of Berlin, of the United States in Berlin, and we are currently writing some papers advising the Chancellery and the State Department and how they can sell the message of supporting Europe to the public. And it's very important to bear in mind that these narratives, as I spoke about in German population, decrease the political leverage of every German government tremendously. So even though the government knows that austerity measures are of course the wrong way to go, they know if they open up for politics that lead to the fact to support the South with more money, even though it is called for, economically speaking, they know they will lose the next election. So this is a good indication as the right populist threat, which of course, as we spoke about previously, has hardly any impact on the parliamentarian level in Brussels, has a huge impact on national affairs, because German politicians are super scared that every pro-European agenda at this point will cost them the next election. And especially German conservatives, which basically have the idea that they need to govern alone because the German liberals are out, meanwhile, know, okay, if we lose 5% to the far right, Social Democrats will take over. So they have this idea, okay, do I support Greece or do I win the next election? That's in a very brief. Yeah.
Oh, perdó, jo sí que tinc una pregunta. Per al company hongarès, si fem un petit paral·lelisme entre, no seria el cas d'Alemanya, però certament sí el cas dels països del bloc o de l'antic bloc comunista i el cas nostre, el cas català dins de l'estat espanyol, m'agradaria saber, perquè si hi ha hagut o de quina manera ha existit una certa continuïtat entre l'antic règim comunista, en el cas vostre, no sé si franquista, autoritari, algú diria feixista en el cas nostre, si i de quina manera aquesta continuïtat ha modelat, influït, o si modela i influeix la política actual d'Hongria. Did you get that?
Yeah. Well, this is a very complex issue and I cannot even address it. Yes, of course, there are manifold continuities. It's important because there were two autocratic regimes before that. There was the fascist regime, of course, until 45, and then the communist regime, and which had a human face period, which was the Kadar regime. I don't know if he was the Hungarian Brezhnev, or just from 56, and it was a softened version of authoritarianism, which is even more dangerous than the stronger one, than the fascist one, because on the fascist one you can point out that this is this and that. These soft regimes have a bigger appeal. They leave you calm. You can prosper if you want, and so on and so forth. So there are these two traditions, and they reach back, of course. And it is also generational problems. There are people who have nostalgias for the fascist regime. There's many of them. Today in Hungary there's a big debate who did the Holocaust. You have to know that in Hungary, for example in Budapest, more than 20% of the population was Jewish, and Hungarian Jews perished 600,000, more than 600,000. Someone did it. Who did it? The Germans came in 44, March 15th, if I remember, of 19th. After that, in 3 months, 600, not 6, because the Budapest Jewry was left intact, so they were not persecuted in that way. More than 400,000 Jews from the countryside were taken to Auschwitz. Who did it? Some Germans, or there was, and Eichmann in Tel Aviv at the trial, of course he was on trial, but he said that they were surprised by the collaboration of the Hungarians in this. The Hungarians were even quicker. And this topic is brought up. Just one example, the Orban government in January this year decided to raise a memorial for the German occupation of Hungary. There's a square, an elliptic square. There is the Soviet memorial since 45. And now on the other focus, in the other focus of the square, they make a memorial for the German occupation, which means that there is the angel, the Gabriel, the Hungarian angel, the symbol of Hungary, and the German bird, the German bird attacks this poor innocent eagle, attacks this poor innocent guy, Gabriel, Hungary. And this is a concept of history, and there is a huge debate, of course, because there are, myself also included, I think this is a complete distortion of history. But the whole Hungarian public life, public discourse is ruled by these topics, this question. All the symbolic question, what we heard of in the morning, is archi important. And all this is the continuities. And there are the generations, of course. There is the generation who are nostalgic for fascism. There are the generations who are nostalgic for the Kadar regime, for the peaceful security, and so on, so forth. Yeah, and the actual this government now and these people, this culture on them, they pick elements from both of the traditions to build up a sort of modernized, up-to-date, contemporary version of something. We don't know where it is going to lead.
I a l'amic alemany li farem una altra pregunta que no té res a veure amb el que ara hem estat parlant. Comentaves que a Alemanya hi ha aquesta idea que també ens arriba a la resta d'Europa o al sud d'Europa de que es van fer unes reformes estructurals quan calia fer-les, que van ser dures, que hi va haver-hi una certa oposició o una forta oposició o resistència per part d'una bona part de la població alemanya, però que bé, aquestes mesures finalment han donat els seus fruits i han pagat el seu preu. I avui Alemanya està en una situació que per molts diríem que és realment envejable. Estem d'acord. També hem de dir, i crec que de vegades a Alemanya la classe política se n'oblida d'esmentar-ho, que també es va haver de pagar un preu per la reunificació alemanya, perquè l'Alemanya de l'Est, que és un exemple d'ampliació en la Unió Europea sense haver-hi una adhesió, o sigui que és un cas que nosaltres potser també l'haurem de tenir present ben aviat o algun dia, si Déu vol, també va tenir unes conseqüències molt punyents per l'economia alemanya i expliquen en part la necessitat d'aquestes reformes, d'aquesta reestructuració de la gran locomotora econòmica que havia estat fins llavors l'Alemanya occidental. Però clar, amb la incorporació de 20 milions de persones dins d'un país de 62 en aquell moment, les coses canvien una mica. Dic tot això perquè hi ha aquesta literatura o aquesta narrativa que en bona part és certa, que l'Europa del Sud, o no només del Sud, encarnada amb aquest acrònim dels PICs, hem fet una festa durant molts anys i ara és lícit i lògic que hàgim de pagar la festa, és a dir, que hàgim de pagar les conseqüències d'aquesta disbauxa. Això és molt correcte. Ara bé, des d'Alemanya, quina percepció s'està tenint? És a dir, es pensa que aquests errors que es van cometre per part de l'Europa del Sud es tornaran a cometre? És a dir, que hi ha una sort de fatalisme envers la resta d'Europa o l'Europa del Sud? Per tant, aquesta Alemanya, si voleu, menys europeïtzada que encarna Merkel avui en dia, en contraposició a Alemanyes anteriors de Adenauer, Helmut Schmidt, Helmut Kohl, etc., pot allunyar una mica Alemanya del projecte europeu i pot fer que Alemanya comenci a valorar altres opcions possibles al marge de la Unió Europea, o al contrari, per Alemanya sobretot tenint present experiències passades, com va poder ser la catàstrofe de la Segona Guerra Mundial, la seva opció inequívoca, únicament vàlida, és mantenir-se dins de la Unió Europea, essent finalment no només la locomotora econòmica, sinó també la gran guia política, i que el sud d'Europa té d'alguna manera solució. Perquè en casos com el grec o el cas espanyol, diguem que, o el cas fins i tot d'Itàlia o la relació amb França, diríem que les narratives que ens han arribat d'Alemanya, si em permets, no sempre han estat del tot clares.
No, thanks for the question. I'm very lucky. I just taught a course on European integration 2 weeks ago to students from the United States, France, and Brazil, and therefore I already encountered these questions, so I can rely on what I told them. This is of course only my very personal impression. So I'm not a commentary of the political climate in Germany in general, but I think there's a few points worth highlighting. If I understand correctly, the question is how would I forecast the standing of Germany in European affairs in the next 5 to 10 years? While I think it's obvious that Angela Merkel and the entire conservative government has a very different take on Europe as Helmut Kohl or Adenauer, this is definitely true. This generation of politicians has lost the war memory, definitely. It doesn't feel personally affected by the war at all. Secondly, they grew up in a reunited Germany, which should not be underestimated. This is very important. Even though the country was economically very poor, there is this understanding that this country is the biggest country in Europe. And this basically accompanied their entire political career, the knowledge that this country is the strongest country. Thirdly, what needs to be borne in mind is Angela Merkel comes from Eastern Germany. So for her, this entire pro-European discourse as an emotional issue is not as easy to be grasped as for a politician who has been socialized in the West, who usually stems from the conservative elites, who have a vacation house in France, who speak various languages, and so forth, while she was brought up in the East. And the entire European affairs is a very rational issue. But two last points I want to make aside from these very personal points is that all the communications we have had with members of the State Department or with the chancelleries is that nobody has a great plan for how to solve this issue. So it's not that the German politicians sit there and wait to finally reorganize Europe in the way they always thought about it. This is by no means the case. So it's a very fluid and open process. And the last thing is, as you can see with the right populist party which is rising right now, the German public discourse has never ever been anti-Europe. Never for a week, never for a day. It's always about to alter the organization of European affairs and to put more emphasis on the clear idea who pays the bill decides what we buy. This is the German narrative in a nutshell. But nobody, say few lunatics, ever considers that Germany should leave Europe.
This is the current narrative, because in the past Germany paid the bill, but France would take the decisions.
Yes, I think this one is over. This one I can dare say is, unless France is recovering as the economic powerhouse in the next 20 years, the German political elite, but also how the newspapers are written, there is this adoption to the fact that this country is on the driving seat now and will be on the driving seat. So, but this is totally historical coincidence. It's a parallel development. You have a conservative in government, the German economy is recovering exactly 3-4 years before the crisis hits. France and England is very, very weak. There is no political leadership on the continent. So there is a bunch of coincidences which lead to the fact that Germany now, very important, gets put into the driver's seat. It's not the German politicians wanted this. This is very important to emphasize. There is a few conservatives who always hope for this. But the entire German elite, and especially German public opinion, is very surprised by this. And there is this statement issued by the Polish Minister for Foreign Affairs where he said, "I fear German inactivity far more than German power." And this thing was very shocking for the Germans themselves, because they thought, hey, aren't we the guys you want to keep in check? And now you want to have leadership from us. So the German public is very pro-European, wants to alter the arrangement, wants to have more say. France is falling out of the picture for now, I think, for the next few years. But the overall public attitude is very pro-European, and I think will be in the next 20 years as well.
Giulio té una pregunta. Endavant.
Thank you. I think that one very important thing that comes out from both situations is how important is the loss of the historical perspective in discussing current affairs. This is quite obvious, especially in a country that was a Western country even before '89 as Germany, but has some consequences also in the case of Hungary, I think. I remember that I was on holiday in former Yugoslavia. It was a place where it was more or less easy for a lot of Hungarians to go on holiday even before the events of '89. I met a group of Hungarians that were in their 30s, more or less, not more than that. And we were talking about the situation. They were obviously very unhappy with the communist regime in Hungary. And it struck me, they were still quite knowledgeable in history, the precedent of good relationship between Hungary and the West, for them, was the strong relationship that existed between Hungary and Italy at the time of the Italian fascist regime. They were talking about a strong relationship between Admiral Horthy's regime and the Italian foreign minister of the fascist regime, Ciano. That was, it seems to me, it was a very popular story in Hungary at the time, because they were knowledgeable about Ciano, which was something quite surprising to me. I was wondering whether this memory of an authoritarian regime that was more integrated with the rest of Europe than what happened after the Second World War played a role in the memory of those in power in Hungary after '89. Because it seems to me that there is something in common with the Yugoslav situation, where you have no elaboration of history apart from the one offered by a totalitarian regime. All the historical problems that existed in a country before covering all the free discussion of history as the consequence of the establishment of a totalitarian regime play a totally different role than it is played where you have a free discussion on history. So you mentioned that it could be interesting to see in the individual experiences, or in the cultural individual experiences of some of the leaders of present Hungary, the reasons why there was this quite astonishing change in their attitude. If you compare what Fidesz was immediately after '89 and what it is today, I'm wondering whether there is one paradigmatic case that you could think of in explaining these things. And for the German case, I think that it's quite widespread in Europe today, the idea. I hear every now and then in Italy this discourse about Germany. That is something that whoever knows at least a little Germany is always astonished of, but the general public buys it very easily. And it is that once again Germany wants to rule all over Europe with different means than during the Nazi. I think that this is the most stupid thing that one can think of Germany today, because it seems to me that the political ideal of most Germans today is to be an enormous, huge Switzerland that is annoyed as little as possible by the rest of the world, that is prosperous, hard-working, and wants to have as little responsibility for the rest of the world, not to mention Europe, as possible. So this hasn't this also to do with the loss of an historical perspective? I think that Germany cherishes its own past much more than any other European nation, and that's why it's probably vaccinated from both the totalitarian experiences that were experimented in the 20th century than any other European nation, and that's probably why extremist parties have never been very lucky in the German electoral history. But it seems to me that, on the other hand, the relationship is somehow less deeply explored of what happens, of the relationships with the other European countries. And finally, do you really think that Alternative für Deutschland can be labeled as a populist party? Because the perception that we have is that it is really a part of the establishment rather than something that can say we the people in comparison with the establishment. Thank you.
Agruparem dues qüestions que tenim i després farem una ronda final dels dos ponents ja per acabar la sessió, la primera sessió d'aquesta tarda. Endavant.
Gràcies, Marc, i primer les congratulations pels dos ponents perquè crec que ha sigut molt interessant i hem après molt. Jo volia fer una primera referència, em sembla que era Jean Monnet, el pare de la Unió Europea, que explicava que si ell hagués de tornar a començar els fonaments de la Unió Europea, començaria per la cultura. I crec que realment del que es tracta és justament d'això. Quan parlem d'una nació, parlem d'un nosaltres que a més és un regulador emocional de com estem en el món i com veiem el món i com estem situats. Això també posa en valor un autor francès del segle XIX, Ernst Renan, que justament va ser el que va explicar aquesta història. I aquest nosaltres és una valoració del passat i també és una valoració del futur. Penso que el que està passant a Catalunya bàsicament té el seu pes en el futur. Els catalans tenim confiança en el futur. Això és d'aquelles coses que quan compares amb segons quins indicadors en el conjunt dels espanyols, la confiança en el futur, no, hi ha més aviat pessimisme. Això per una banda. Per altra banda, com s'enfoca el passat? Jo, sentint companys liberals dels antics països de l'est, penso que ells han tingut un avantatge en relació a nosaltres, i és que a partir de l'any 89 el passat soviètic s'entén que és tòxic i per tant és absolutament deixat de banda, cosa que marca una diferència, per exemple, amb Catalunya / Espanya, quan l'any 75 mor Franco i accedeixen a la democràcia. El que passa aquí és que aquest passat franquista, feixista, corporativista no es considera tòxic. Aquí no hi ha una revolució, hi ha una transició. Hi ha una transició que a més deixa, deixa que durant un temps el franquisme es blanqueja i t'entra per la porta del darrere en forma de nacionalisme espanyol virulent. Jo aquí també faria referència a un altre autor alemany, que em sembla que encara és viu, Ernst Nolte, que és el que ha teoritzat la guerra civil europea. I com els europeus s'han enfrontat al seu passat, el passat feixista i el passat comunista. És d'aquelles coses curioses. Per exemple, penso que a Alemanya és possible fer una excel·lent pel·lícula com és Bye Bye Lenin i fer una referència gairebé entranyable, oi, a la dictadura de l'Alemanya de l'Est. En canvi, evidentment no seria possible fer una pel·lícula que es digués Bye Bye Hitler, perquè això seria impensable. En canvi, a Espanya, una pel·lícula que es digués Bye Bye Franco, crec que en aquests moments seria perfectament possible i perfectament, diguem-ne, que funcionaria. I si llegiu, diguem-ne, la premsa, em sembla que aquella sèrie Cuéntame va d'això, no? De dir, bueno, com blanquegem el passat, o que bé que vivíem, que bé que estàvem. Doncs tot això són frens a l'hora d'enfocar el futur. Marc Gafarot ha explicat un concepte important, que és el de societat del benestar. Societat, diguem-ne, i per tant, som nosaltres com ens veiem a nosaltres mateixos, com ens autorregulem pel futur. Això està bastant també en la línia de les directives europees. El projecte europeu és que hem de competir entre nosaltres i hem de competir amb el món i, a més, les actuacions econòmiques que endeguem han de ser econòmicament sostenibles, cosa que en els europeus del sud això culturalment, genèticament, no sé com, però ens és absolutament impossible. Ens costa bastant de... Però, diguem-ne, per tant, s'ha d'actuar en aquest imaginari col·lectiu. Diguem-ne, amb aquestes asimetries, no? Com veiem, perquè, per exemple, a Catalunya, més aviat allà és on te volia acabar, no? Dius, el passat franquista que hi va haver en aquest país, que evidentment n'hi va haver, però és una cosa que a nivell col·lectiu hem aconseguit expulsar-la. Això no ha passat aquí, en tot cas era gent de fora, tal i qual. Però, en canvi, la violència que va venir de l'altra banda, aquest tema no s'ha tractat encara. A Barcelona hi va haver, i a Catalunya, una revolució anarquista molt violenta, seguida d'una revolució comunista.
30 segons.
30 segons. Doncs el tema aquest. Diguem-ne, vosaltres com veieu per tractar en el futur, des del punt de vista de la cultura, aquest nosaltres. Gràcies.
Aquesta senyora.
Sí, moltes gràcies. Bona tarda, molt agraïda als dos ponents perquè ho considero molt interessant. En principi tinc una pregunta pel senyor Lochocki. Sí, senyor alemany. A veure, faci 5 cèntims, sisplau, 5 només, 5 cèntims de... que jo, a veure, aprovo i ja estic amb el que vostès diuen de senyora Merkel de l'Alemanya oest, fantàstic, però a veure, ella com tota la resta del món suposo que bueno, primer va estar allà i ara està aquí. I tots hem fet el mateix. No crec que ella sigui diferent. Primer punt. I segon punt és que amb la part econòmica d'Alemanya jo tinc una curiositat. A veure, a mi m'han arribat informacions, no sé, certes o no, de que Alemanya concretament s'ha enriquit, entre cometes, concretament de nosaltres, d'Espanya. Dic d'Espanya perquè, clar, el govern el tenim allà. El meu govern poqueta cosa pinta en aquest sentit, malauradament. Espero que aviat hi pintarem molt. Però que vostès tenien un problema econòmic com tots hem tingut al llarg de la història i vostès compraven diners, fons, posem el títol que vulguem, espanyols amb un preu elevadíssim i després ens han tornat, escolti, la cosa més minsa. Això és veritat? I una última.
Molt ràpidament.
Sí, molt ràpid. A veure, tots sabem, el que no sabem com, a mi m'interessa el com, l'Alemanya unificada, com s'ho va fer? Escolti, per fer un procés tan ràpid, Expliqui-m'ho, perquè jo també vull ser-hi i vull ser nació, vull ser jo, no vull ser acompanyada.
Molt bé.
Gràcies.
Demanaré, després de que el públic s'ha despertat tard, però s'ha despertat i amb molt de vigor, cosa que està molt bé, demanaré aquell adagi llatí, bonum si brevis vis bonum. Be concise, please.
Okay, then I'll try to be brief and answer all these questions. I start from this. This is something I encounter very often whenever I go abroad and we talk about German politics and German immigration and German EU relation. The German past has a far greater importance for not Germans than for Germans. In a sense that for the German policymakers and for the German public, the German past is very well in the back of our minds, but it's not linked to, as you might assume, oh my God, the Holocaust, we might never ever have an army. This is not how it works. Meanwhile, it's me, I'm the fourth generation after the war, which is getting in their 30s. And these guys before us is the second and third generation after the war who is in policy positions already. So the past, of course, has a say in how people make politics, but it's not as it was in the 60s and the 70s, that this is automatically leading into constraining how you wage foreign policy. On the very contrary, meanwhile, it's even like that I have some people at the United Nations saying, whenever I talk to the United States or people from France, they say, well, you know, we, the Germans, we apologized for our mistakes. We know what we've done. Therefore, we should send troops abroad. You guys never apologized for what you've done. Therefore, we are the moral superpower. Meaning, of course, I'm exaggerating here, but I want to say the national past is not as seen as extremely negative as it used to be in the 60s, 70s. On the contrary, this is considered as something which is informing you and making you a more mature actor on the national stage, which is very, very dangerous because, as the gentleman from Italy pointed out, this leads to double standards because you say very easily, well, you know, these guys, they want to intervene in Libya. We could, but we don't want to because we learned our lessons from history. In fact, of course, it's just saying, oh my God, if I send German troops abroad, I will never win the next election. So it's very easy to duck away and say, well, you know, we the Germans learned our history lesson. So as much as the past can be used in order to portray force abroad, it is used, exactly as you outlined here, to aim for a greater Switzerland, which of course enables you to just bail out of whatever decision ought to be taken. So this is very important to bear in mind. The history plays a very different role in contemporary German public discourse than other people might think. Also, this does not explain why these parties come up or not. I know this is a very prominent narrative, but this is not the case, why these parties fare well or not. Yes. Then,
Germany taking money from us?
Yes. I assume what you refer to is the fact that Germany now, since the European Central Bank has lowered the interest rates in order to stimulate the European economy, Germany can loan for 0%. Meaning Germany had to pay 3 or 4% for the state loans, and now they get it for free. Meaning that Germany, in this very year, saves 30 billion euros just for the mere fact that they don't pay interest rates. And 30 billion euros is a lot of money. It's basically the entire budget of the Department of Defense. And no German politician ever has done anything for this.
It's the budget of the Catalan government.
It's the budget of the Catalan government, exactly. So basically, this of course is due to the fact that the European Central Bank lowers interest rates. So there's an indirect benefit, definitely. But I'm not an economist. I'm not aware of all this. The last one was about, well, if I could explain why German reunification worked out within 2 minutes, I wouldn't sit here but have a chair in Harvard. So therefore, I think this we have to do some other time or on a bilateral basis.
Yeah, we have to be very brief. Yeah, this question of Ciano Horthy, I don't think that it is in the imagination of the majority of the Hungarians, although we have a special relationship to the Italians in general, but I don't want to dwell on that. It is true that history was not discussed enough, and contrary to Germany, it is very important. The non-enoughly discussed history is very important problem in Hungary. On one point you asked that somehow to grab the problem. If you want to explain the Hungarian history, Hungarian politics, and what is happening today, you can go back to a university college during the last years of the 80s, where there were two generations present. There were the students, because it was a college, a university college, from the countryside. The students were from the countryside, and there were the young intellectuals who were in the democratic opposition. Pro-Western, very refined philosophers, André Glucksmann and Henri Lévy, etc., this type of generationally, and also they knew very well this. They were one group. So they were the teachers. But what was interesting that they were the admired teachers at the same time, and these are the micro-histories. At the same time, these countryside guys had a certain aspect toward these urban and so on, and cosmopolitan, and who had the moral statue, because they were the democratic opposition, hailed in the West, and so on, and they did very serious things against the regime. So, and there was a freedom fight during the next years after the changes on the part of these guys. Orbán Viktor was among these guys, was in this college. So you can, if you want to understand, this is one very important story. This is a micro story. Behind the scenes, what is very important, the hinterland of this whole story, is the division of Hungary in between two cultures, which is the country culture, which is the eastern part of Hungary, and the western part of Hungary, mainly Budapest. Budapest, the urban city, which is used to be always a very lively cosmopolitan Central European center, linked very much with Vienna and Prague. Has a certain vision. The countryside always, so there is a huge breach and tension, which is of course the consequence of the Trianon Treaty, which was, what was the problem with the Trianon Treaty? Not that it cut so many Hungarians and they are abroad, because they were dispersed among natives there who were in majority. The real problem of the Trianon Treaty, according to me, we are talking about 1918, after the First World War, which took two-thirds of Hungary. The problem was that on the border, there were the big cities, Hungarian cities, which were majority Hungarians. In Slovakia, in Romania, and in 6 kilometers from the border, sometimes. These cities went over to the neighboring countries. So Hungary got really with lively city lives, urban lives. So Hungary really became a very unnatural, culturally speaking, a very unnatural and very divided country. And this division, these two cultures, which are a bit self-defined against each other, are fighting, and this a certain sort of fight, and this fight is reflected also in the political positions, in the political parties. The liberals are, of course, more essentially from Budapest, and they are this Western-oriented party and state of the country. I could speak on that very long, but I don't.
Ok, acabem. Dues consideracions rapidíssimes. Una diferència entre Espanya i Alemanya. A Espanya hi ha una fundació Francisco Franco Stiftung, existeix, i a Alemanya una Adolf Hitler Stiftung seria una mica complicat que existís, i esperem que no existeixi. I el que deia en Pere, a l'època d'en Renan, de l'abat Sieyès, es deia a França que la nació era un plebiscit diari. Esperem que Espanya això ho acabi entenent. Moltíssimes gràcies als dos ponents, crec que ha estat una brillant intervenció germano-húngara, i la veritat és que torno a felicitar a l'audiència perquè té molt de mèrit que hàgiu estat avui aquí amb tots nosaltres, amb aquesta xafogó que fa aquí a la ciutat de Barcelona. Gràcies.